How important are Nations Cups to developing Australian riders and horses at the top end of the scale ready for championships?
I think they're hugely important, Annie. I think especially with championships in regard, at the end of the day it's a team sport at that level, and I think that's very, very important that people have the opportunity to experience that. I think the Nations Cups over the last 3 years that I've been involved with have all been very different. We've had some strong teams and some weaker teams, and I think, to be honest, the weaker teams in people's First Nations Cups, and horses' First Nations Cups, and coming into the team fold and being involved and included in a team environment is something that people underestimate, and I think it's incredibly important to the sport and to the Australian team spirit going forward.
Great. How do we develop Australian-based riders ready for Nations Cup when we don't have so many team events in the Australian landscape?
Well, I think the sport nowadays is considered an individual sport at the higher levels, and teams come together for Nations Cups and for championships. But I think the most important thing is to cultivate a team environment from an early age. I think, starting with children, juniors, young riders, especially in the junior sort of spectrum, I think it's very, very important that there are squads, that there's an inclusion rather than exclusion environment, whereby the kids perhaps from lesser backgrounds are helped by outside forces, whether it be state-run or national squads, because I think everyone deserves a fair chance. I think that interstate competition, whether it be at a local county level or at a state level, is always very healthy. I think the earlier that kids start being involved in a team environment, it doesn't just help their riding skills, it's also a life lesson. And I think it's very, very important to understand that successful teams are built around a camaraderie and an atmosphere whereby everyone is fighting together rather than fighting for oneself. This year it's an Olympic year. I'm here in Sopot. It's coming down to crunch time as far as selection goes, but the environment within the team is great. They all know each other. They've been around for a while. Everyone's fighting for an individual spot. But at the same time, I'm sure at the end of the day, they all want to be the one that's going to get the ticket for Rio. But everyone is working towards the same goal. And I think that's the environment that we need to have going forward.
Fantastic. We've entered 4 Nations Cup events this year: USA, Linz in Austria, and Odense in Denmark, and now Sopot. This year, the horse pool is rather a young bunch at this level, with some riders experiencing top-level competition for the first time.
Yes, this year's been interesting, and I think if we just to run through it, we started in Ocala earlier on this year, which was an American-based team, and I think the way the sport's going, there seems to be a number of very strong Australian partnerships coming out of the US. I think the industry there lends itself to Australian horsemanship. They appreciate good horsemanship, and I think a lot of people have been there for long enough that they've really made a go of it there and have successful businesses. And through those businesses, they've been able to cultivate owners. And through those owners now, they're putting horses into the top level of the sport. So Ocala was a very interesting Nations Cup to be involved in. We had Scott Keach and Matt Williams, who obviously have been around many times before, but we also had Hardy Brown, who's been around before but wouldn't have that much exposure at a team level, and of course Tom McDermott, who I think is, for the future going forward, as with most young Australian riders coming out of Australia, it was great exposure for him. I know he didn't have the day he'd wished for, but I think he learned a lot going forward and will really stand to him. And then coming back to Europe, Linz. Linz was an interesting Nations Cup. I think the team that we went to Linz with was a real mixture. Obviously, Chuggy at one end of the spectrum and JPR, and then we had 2 new riders with Merrick and Stevie Hill. And I think for Merrick and for Stevie Hill, I think it was a step up. I think both of them learned a lot. Unfortunately, we didn't get to compete in the second round of the Nations Cup, because that really would have been it would have been great to see where they went from their first round experiences. But again, first Nations Cup, first time competing with the team in Europe. I think both of them took an awful lot away from that weekend. Then Odense, again, an inexperienced team, perhaps a more experienced group of riders, but in Odense we had the situation whereby we had Jamie Kermond, who obviously has been around a lot, Julia, who's been around a lot also, but on a 9-year-old horse, Phil, who has a little bit of experience, but also on a 9-year-old horse. And, you know, it's always impressive to see how someone comes out of Linz and then steps up in Odense and Stevie Hill. You know, he was slightly out of his depth in Linz during the Nations Cup. He made a few novice errors and he corrected that in Odense and put in a great showing, with the best of the team. So, you know, again, I think Phil's horse went green. I think Kerm's horse perhaps didn't have the day he wanted to, and I think that Julia's horse went green as well. So we had a bad day, but out of that bad day, I think a lot was learned, and I'm hoping that today, especially in Kerm's situation, that he'll go and jump 2 clear rounds tomorrow and will have learned from his day in Odense. And I think looking at it in that aspect, Nations Cups, it's not all about winning, because at this stage of our situation going forward, a lot of the riders that have come over with their aspirations being towards Rio, I don't think understand what Olympic competition's about. And the Nations Cups are a great way of bringing people into the sport to a higher level and opening their eyes as to what they need to do to achieve that next level of jumping. And I'm sure that this summer was very, very beneficial, although the results were, of course, disappointing.
Describe the interplay of the 3 landscapes of USA, Europe and Australia in terms of developing of our athletes and horses.
Well, having been in the job now for 3 years, I've sort of I've got a better grasp for what's happening at home in Australia, and I still need to learn a lot more. But what I've noticed is that there seems to be a very good bunch of young horses coming through. Talented riders has never really been an issue. I mean, for years you've been among the best countries in the world. I mean, I'd say Ireland and Australia have probably the 2 most natural groups of horsemen of any countries anywhere. But there seems to be a program at home now where quality horses are coming through the ranks. So hopefully in the up and coming years these horses will present themselves at a higher level and be able to be part of national teams going forward to Olympics and World Championships. I think Australia is a wonderful place to produce horses. I think the fact that you have so many different shows, that the cost of showing isn't so prohibitive, and you have the ability to bring horses on in a quiet and less pressurized environment than perhaps in Europe. I think what's important is that, especially at a young horse level, that things are organized in the way that there's a system that's in place that people can understand, whereby you start slow in the year and you build up towards the final. That it's a gradual education of horse and rider, and that young horses aren't pushed to their limits too early in their careers. As far as Europe and the US are concerned, I think on the sporting front, I think they're basically the same. The US has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. The sport there has become very comparable with the sport in Europe. And the horse shows are different in the fact that the riders in the US are more business driven. They support generally a client-based business. So they have their couple of Grand Prix horses, but they also spend a lot of their time teaching and training and looking after their owners, which I think at the end of the day is also something that needs to be brought into Australian culture, in the fact that owners are imperative in the sport. Very few of us are wealthy enough to support ourselves, so you're looking for third-party help, and that's a skill in itself that needs to be addressed and looked after from a young age. You know, the benefactors that are involved in the sport should be supported and praised and looked after, because at the end of the day, without them, we can't do anything. And the sport in Europe is a sport in Europe. I mean, it's big, it's vast. It runs from 2-star to 5-star. The difference is massive between a 5-star show and a 2 or 3-star show. And I think anyone who's been over here and spent time here understands that to compete at 5-star level, it takes a huge amount of dedication, a massive amount of professionalism, and a large amount of backing. So to come here and be able to compete at that level, be able to get into those horse shows, be really at the top end of the sport is a huge undertaking, and it requires a massive commitment.
Sure, and I guess that leads into what challenges do you as a chef d'equipe face in terms of team development, with Australia being a smaller nation in the mix of things?
I think there's a huge question there as to what you can change. I mean, I think the group of riders I've been involved with have been incredibly positive, very, very easy to work with, and willing to listen and willing to learn. I think the more experienced riders are great role models for the younger guys coming up. And I think that's an important part of it, whereby I think the younger guys coming up should look at the likes of Jamie Kerman and JPR and Edwina and really learn from how they do things and what effort they put in. I think as far as changing things from the base, I think it's very, very important that we start with squads at a younger level, that juniors and young riders are brought under an umbrella that makes sense, that there is outside assistance available to them, whether it be foreign coaches or Australian coaches, but that there's a constant learning opportunity there for everybody. And then I think the owners and the people who are involved in the sport and who stand behind the sport and promote the sport have to be looked after, and they have to be taken into consideration in a way that, how can we best use their resources? How can their resources best be put how could their resources best be used with the idea of pushing the sport forward at a higher level? And I think that boils down to trying to keep a hold of some horses, understanding what young horses there are that really have the talent, and trying to get them into the right hands, and then supporting the people who really deserve the support. And I think if those things can come together, I think it could be a really, really successful situation. Luckily, Australia has a very, very good group of riders, and the talent is there, so it's a question of trying to build on that talent.